So good evening, everyone. Emma's done a good introduction to me. I've got 10 minutes, so I'm probably not going to go into a lot of detail, but I will be around later on if anyone wants to discuss any of the things that I'm going to talk about in more detail. So David talked about disruption, and disruption is really interesting because from a security perspective, there are some big disruptors that challenge all of us today. And there's really 4 of them. So the first one is big data. We've already heard that mentioned today. The second one is cloud computing. The third one is mobile. And the fourth one is social media. So those 4 things that used to be around are really strategic to our businesses today. It also means an incredible opportunity for innovation and collaboration. It also means an incredible opportunity for innovation and collaboration for the criminals as well. Because we're actually connecting things together, and again, we heard the word converged earlier. We are converging all these technologies in our businesses together, and unfortunately that means that we're actually under threat from different channels all the time. So what are the threats that we see today? So 2013, there's a number of different areas, I suppose. The first one is the volume of attacks. There are various numbers around in terms of the types and the number of attacks that we see. They're not going to go away. They're actually going to change. They're actually going to change in the sense that the criminals are actually moving their business model. So where we used to see what we call petty criminals or crime against perhaps credit card fraud or personal PII type information, personal information, that there's no money left in that anymore. You can actually buy thousands of credit cards with valid details very, very cheaply, and there isn't any money left in it anymore. So actually the criminals are doing something very different. So we see bigger threats from nation states, for example, where there is more money there. So stealing things like intellectual property, for example, which is where really the money's to be made. So that whole dynamic, if you like, from moving from petty criminals to advanced threat and actually nation state as a threat becomes very interesting. So those are the first few things that we see today. We do know that security isn't working today. And we say it's not working because we're all investing in security. We still see security budgets. But actually the reality is we're still being compromised. So something's got to change. Something's broken. So we need to think about what we call intelligence-driven security. And there are a number of things that we can do. So the first reason why security is not working is because the tools that we have today are the tools that we used to have, or we've always had. So we think about perimeter-based security, we think of signature-based devices. They're not good anymore because malware that we see that attacks companies is freshly compiled. It's compiled for that one specific attack, which means that there are no signatures that exist. So we really need to think about different ways of being able to protect our environment. We need to think about stopping the attackers, so we need to detect and disrupt the attackers. And one of the things that we need to think about is closing that window. So if you think of an attack, going on in an organization, the time that it takes from the attack actually starting to it being discovered it's a very long time, typically. And the Verizon report, if anyone's interested, actually states very specific times as to how long that takes. And in most cases, it's months. So we call that sort of that empty space dwell time. So we need to think about shrinking that window. So we know we're going to get compromised. I don't think we can say that we've got this perimeter and we're not going to get compromised. The compromise is inevitable. But we really need to think about identifying the attackers and actually stopping them very, very quickly. And I think that's what will make a difference. So if we think about what can we be doing, and I'm probably not going to go through all of these, but I think there's some interesting challenges here. In the WOW presentation, we talked about people. People are the new perimeter. And last year, I did a couple of blogs on configuring the human firewall. Social engineering is one of the weapons of choice that criminals are using to attack organizations. So how do you train the human firewall? How do you actually equip the human with the right tools to be able to recognize a fake URL, a phishing email, or anything like that? There are some interesting technologies around that help you do that, and certainly we ourselves in-house have started using some of those technologies. The problem is, if you think about security training, people go and sit in a room like this. They have to do it every year or every 6 months. You tick the box, so you do it online, and you say, yeah, I've done it. I used to work for an organization where I actually knew all the answers even before I saw the question pop up, because I had done the same security training every 6 months. There are no metrics to that, so you can't actually say, well, actually, we've trained all our people. But there are new technologies and new innovations. There are gaming companies that actually allow you to play a game, but you're actually learning while you're playing that game, so you can recognize phishing attacks or anything like that. So that's an interesting one, doing something differently than what you've always done in terms of security. I talk about implementing automation. The things that I talked about, so if you think about big data, if we are going to be using big data, if we are going to be using cloud and the security technologies that we have, it's going to generate a lot of information. A lot of organizations have the technology today. They do generate a lot of information, but actually don't do anything with it because they're overwhelmed by so much information. So how do you prioritize that information? And how do you make the connection between the technical piece of security, the IT security, and the business? Can you say that if you have a compromise and it's on a server and the IP address is 192. whatever, if you shut that server down, do you know from a business perspective what is on that server? Is it your e-commerce operation that's running on it? So it's being able to make that correlation and adding some context to it becomes really important. Revisit risk. Risk isn't new, we've all been doing it, but we all do it really badly. So think about what's important to you, what information do you have that somebody else may want, and how are you protecting it? How quickly can you actually change some of the things that you're doing? And you can't do any of that without automation. So think about tools like security analytics that actually help you make some of those tools, help you recreate an attack so that you can actually learn from it. And again, that's a very interesting methodology there, something called kill chain from Lockheed Martin in the US, who obviously get attacked all the time. It's a defense contractor. And they talk about 7 phases of attack. So all the way from weaponization, so what weapon are we going to use to attack, all the way through to actually going through the attack. But as organizations, we need to think about moving backwards in that kill chain. If we can actually stop an attack in one place, then we've been successful for that one attack. If we can disrupt the kill chain in several places, that makes us truly defensive. So think about those 7 phases. It makes very interesting reading. Well, I think it's interesting. You can look at the kill chain online. So it actually goes through those 7 phases. So think about those 7 phases, how they match to your own security implementations that you have, and how effective you are at breaking some of those chains as we go through. So those are some of the different things that you should be thinking about. Another interesting one that there's a lot of talk about both within the UK government and within the EU is about information sharing. And again, I think of this as the neighborhood watch scheme. If you think about how effective neighborhood watch schemes have become, it's the same concept. When we get compromised, typically we don't want to share that information. But actually, by sharing that information, we learn from each other and we learn to protect each other. So there are, in some industries, there are information sharing schemes, but obviously it's actually a challenge to implement, because how do you share that information with the most number of people when you've got very sensitive information? There are obviously privacy issues that come into play there as well. So think about the information that you have, think about gathering information about your business, about your industry, and see how, if you have compromises, for example, how do you share from that and how do you learn from that? Some of the other things that you could be thinking about is things that we've always done, but we need to go back to, just like risk. So I talk about re-architecting IT. What I mean by that is that we all have very flat networks. The reason we have flat networks is because they're easy to administrate. Well, guess what? Once the criminals get into our networks, it's easy for them to get around as well. So think about how you can redesign some of your networks and help you change some of the dynamic and break some of that kill chain. And really the final thing you should be thinking about is really I've put a lot of things on there. The first thing I've put on there is security maturity. And there's 4 phases. So think about where you are as a business in the 4 phases. The first phase is what we call threat management. So it's really protecting the perimeter, which is typically where most organizations would have started in terms of security. The second phase is compliance, and that's one of the problems today. Security budgets are typically driven by compliance, and that means that compliance is typically in silos, and there's always gaps in the middle. And it's the gaps or the seams, if you like. The more seams you have, the more vulnerabilities you have. So think about where you are in that step. So that's the second step. The third step is IT security. And then the final step is making that correlation between a file server and the business context that relates to it. I've run out of time, so I'm going to stop. I will be around later on, so if anyone's got any questions, then please come and see me. Thank you.